welcome to you. You're listening to The Music Business Buddy with me, Johnny Amos, podcasting out of Birmingham in England. I'm the author of the book, The Music Business for Music Creators, available in hardback, paperback, ebook format. I'm a music creator with credits on a variety of major and indie labels as a writer-producer. I'm also a senior lecturer in both music business and music creation. Wherever you are, whatever you do, consider yourself welcome to this podcast and to a part of the community. I'm here to educate and inspire music creators from all over the world in their quest to achieving their goals by gaining a greater understanding of the business of music. Okay, so in today's episode, I am talking to the brilliant Grammy Award-winning mix engineer and mastering engineer, James Auwarter. Now, James is somebody that I met at a music event last year in London. We were both speaking on the event, and I just really hit it off with him. He's such a nice guy. He's funny, he's brilliant to be around, he's brilliant with people, he's superb in his line of work. And, and I thought, well, maybe he'd make a great guest for the podcast. So I asked him. He was into the idea, and so this is how this came about. He's brilliant. He has got a total of, get this, 32 Grammy nominations. Yes, you heard that right. 32. He's not even that old. I mean, that's how good he is. So he's worked with the likes of Rihanna, Kanye West, Yo-Yo Ma, PJ Morton, Adam Levine. The list goes on and on and on. He's amazing. He's really kind of developed a very particular thing that he does, which is receiving files and mixing or mastering them, or both. He's also a multi-genre guy, and not many people in that field at that elite level are. They usually specialise in one style or another. But James isn't like that. He turns his hand to a whole range of styles, R&B, right over to country and everywhere in between. He's very, very versatile, and he has a very set way of working which applies itself to pretty much any style. So I wanted to talk to him about kind of, what got him from, young guy playing in bands all the way up to being a Grammy Award-winning engineer. So I wanted to understand his story and ask him a few questions. And so here's how that went. James, welcome to The Music Business Buddy. It's good to have you here. How are you, mate?
I am really well. Thanks for having me, Johnny.
Hey, it's good to have you here. So let's get rolling with the first question, James. So if we start with the now before we kind of slightly go back in time in your career. So you've made it to the top of the tree as a mix engineer, right? Not only have you won a prestigious Grammy Award, but in total you've been credited with 32 Grammy nominations. Dude, first of all, my hat's off to you, right? That's absolutely amazing. It really is, right? Now, how did you go about kind of finding that niche? Because the reality is there's a lot of strings to your bow, right? You're not just a mix guy or just a mastering guy. So how did you go about kind of finding that lane?
Yeah, good question. Well, I try to work in as many genres as possible. I've had, I guess, maybe the bulk of the success in hip hop and gospel. But I've worked with some pretty big names in classical, some pretty big names in rock and reggae. So I try to do a little bit of everything, and I think that can sometimes be an attribute or detriment, depending on the person. You spread yourself too thin. But I think if you take it seriously enough and you try, uh, you try your damnedest to give whatever you're approaching a sense of authenticity, and then I think that goes a long way, both with the client and your average listener. So for me, it's a necessity to work in slightly different roles, slightly different genres from day to day. It must have something to do with my my ADD. I think maybe I need to have something kind of pushing me in different directions all the time. But yeah, absolutely. Like you said, I mix, I master, I record, I do Dolby Atmos. I occasionally produce, but primarily, mixing and mastering is what keeps me the busiest these days.
Interesting. And when do you do like all your own kind of mix prep, or do you have somebody do that for you? Or because I know it varies quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah. These days, I generally do. I mean, probably 95% of that kind of mixed prep. I mean, I came up in the industry 20 years ago, the traditional route as an intern and assistant and general assistant and kind of work my way up. So yeah, at some point I was the one who would prep the mixes. Um, so I realized that there is that side of things, and it does have a lot of upside to it. But nowadays, even the biggest of mixers are, most of them, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them are very much, prepping it themselves. It's a lot easier than it used to be, being completely in the box as opposed to back in the day with an analog console and all the analog outboard gear and, 100 patch cables that needed to be patched, etcetera. But now, it being digital and knowing how I want my session to be routed, it generally makes sense for me to do all that prep work. If it's a scenario where there needs to be a lot of editing or comping or tuning, that's not a mix thing. That's a pet peeve of a lot of mix engineers. Unfortunately, it kind of gets kind of blended into the mix process sometimes. So if and when that happens, and if and when the financial business agreement aspect of that gets sorted, then sometimes that will be something I outsource, just so I'm not overly bogged down with that ahead of time. I can kind of be hands off, pass it off to one of my guys in Chicago at my studio, who I'll usually pass those kind of things off to. I can trust them; they can send it back in a timely fashion, and it keeps my head in a clearer headspace for once it actually comes time to be creative and dive into the mix process at that point.
Yeah, I've often wondered about that because there's often an assumption there, right? Right, let's do this, let's do that, let's tune it up, it's like, well, that's not really part of the process, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. James, sorry, I hadn't planned to ask you this, but I'm just thinking about this now. Do you know, one of the things that can often be a struggle for many people as a recipient, as a mix engineer, or as somebody sending stems off to somebody to mix, is the level of expectation of a mix engineer, right? So sometimes, do you find like a lot of variation between people's expectations? Like, do you get some people that just go, right, here's everything pretty much as we want it. You just need to do some like surgical EQ and stuff. Or do you get people that go, there's what we've done, turn that into something special? Like, because those are two different things, right?
They are very different things, yeah. I very much have generally been a part of the, send me the full raw multi tracks. Yes, give me as good of a rough mix, stereo balance as you got. I'm a very firm believer in the first and most important reference track is the rough mix, and what have they been living with? Because a lot of that stuff is done on purpose and it already sounds good, or it was done purposeful, doesn't quite hit the mark, but I get the idea and I can interpret that. A big hall reverb on the snare is important to hear, even if I can make it better. I want to know that that's the general vibe that you're going for. So the rough mix is very important as far as how they deliver the files to me, whether it's full exported raw multi-track WAV files or whether it's a Pro Tool session. Um, the next level of that is, do they bounce it where everything is at a good appropriate uh digital level, as opposed to, if you pull everything up at Unity, does it essentially sound like the rough mix? And those are two different schools of thoughts as well. And I kind of think really ties into what you're asking is, how far does the producer and the artist take the rough mix stage, and do they just want a little bit of surgical EQ, or do they want me to kind of put my stamp on it? And
Mm,
more often than not, it's the latter where they want me to put my stamp on it. But regardless, it's important to have that conversation and to get on the same page. Communication is crucial. And Yeah, I mean, it's one of the first things I ask, is, let me hear the rough mix. Are there specific things that you like and dislike about it? Are there any other reference tracks that you have in mind? And a lot of times they don't want to give out a whole lot of reference tracks because, of course, their song is completely original, right? There's nothing whatsoever that's in any way, resembles anything else that's ever been done, right? Of course, right? However, if you kind of beat it out of them, you can say, well, you know what? I really love the snare drum on this last Taylor Swift song, or, I really love the 808s on this Travis Scott song, or, you can really go with drastically different reference tracks without saying you're ripping off a track or a production or a song or any of those things. You can just say, I like the way sonically this makes me feel. Another good trick in that regard is, to kind of beat that reference track out of them is say, hey, okay, well, let's say when this is done and it's put on a Spotify playlist, what would you envision to be before and after it. And that's a way to figure out, I can decipher some of that. I can read between the lines, and what they want. Um, Sometimes they don't know in a very clear, specific manner, to say, I want very little done or very little, put your full stamp on it. They don't clearly know, but I can kind of hear their rough mix and kind of, if nothing else, just be an extra set of ears to say, wow, you guys really did nail this, and it doesn't need a whole lot more. But here's what I'm hearing, and I'll send it back to you soon, and we'll go from there. And again, it's just always about the communication, first conversation, I think, and getting on the same page.
Okay. So you kind of sometimes have to kind of rein in your creativity in order to stay on point with what people expect. But do you ever have like situations where you go, okay, I know exactly what they want. They've been really, really clear. I need to just sit down and do this. However, I also have my own vision for what this could be. Do you ever run off like two different mixes like that?
Sometimes. I think it more so boils down to that initial conversation and to see how not stuck in their ways they are, but how much demoitis they have. How in love are they with the current rough mix that they already have. It'll also depend on the relationship that I have with that client. If I've worked with them for a long time, years, in some cases, then I know, based upon past songs that we've done together, how they really liked when I went out on a limb for this kind of element here and there, and so I can reference some of those past tracks that we've done, and utilize those same kind of ideas, or at least the limits of those ideas, with new tracks. I mean, sometimes I get it wrong. Sometimes I do go out on a limb, and it's wrong, right? I'm human just like everyone else. It's still an absolutely a customer focused industry. So it's I'm not the rock star, they're the rock star. So even though I can put my stamp on it, and sometimes it's for the best, sometimes I can get it wrong. And I think it's important, for all mix engineers to realize that they're not the rock star, and it can hurt the ego a little bit, but such is life, right? It's customer focused industry. We're a service industry, so we got to make it right, regardless of how we get there. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's not as simple as A plus B equals C, kind of a formulaic situation, for better or worse. And yeah, yeah. Hopefully
Wow.
that answers that
No,
question.
that's it's great to hear. I mean, that's such a professional perspective. And you say you're only human. I'm not sure about that, James. I've heard a lot of your mixes. You're a machine. I mean, but you got to put, there's your taste is always going to come into it a little bit, right? Whether it's like I don't know, choice of effects or whatever it might be, it's all a. Now, tell us about Coda, right? Because Coda Audio Room, it's your company. It's you have set up in Chicago, right? Which is where you're from. You're in Chicago right now, but you reside in London, don't you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Ohio, and I went to university in Florida, and then I moved to Chicago for 15 years. And about halfway through that stint is when I landed in Coda Room Audio, in the uh, Noble Square area of Chicago, and yeah, when I decided to move to London about 5 years ago, I decided to look at, kind of an expansion, not a like for like traditional expansion, but I wanted to keep the Chicago location open. I had to get in some, additional engineers to kinda do the day-to-day stuff, obviously, which is something that I had not done prior. Before, it was basically, yes, it was Coder Audio, but it was just me there as the main guy with the
Ah,
occasional freelancer, kinda coming in. And, when I moved but wanted to keep it open, I had to think about it a totally different way. The space itself, isn't especially big. It's an amazing sound and control room, that I feel very much at home at. Has a really nice vibed out, spacious vocal booth, sound lock. But that's it. When I needed to do full bands or choir, orchestra or something, I'd freelance out of another facility. I'm in a building where there's three other, similar sized studios as mine on this floor, and then a very large one downstairs. So I have, relatively easy access if and when it's necessary. But yeah, that's the Chicago side of things. I had anticipated on opening up a similar size space in London, and I got there and COVID hit, like, a month or two later. Yeah, it was bad timing, but, COVID hit everybody everywhere, like everyone else did, and, so I started, I reverted back into the home studio, and I've gotten comfortable, and to where, now, years later, I'm still doing most of my mixing and mastering at home, in London, and yes, I miss my Chicago control room, but I'm also not in a big rush. I'm waiting for the right opportunity to kinda, present itself in London. In the meantime, I can freelance, depending on what every session needs. But yeah, that's kind of the situation is that Coda Room,
Wow.
physical location is Chicago, where I am right now.
That's amazing, isn't it? I mean, okay, so the technology has evolved to such a point where you can do this from anywhere, right? Pretty much. Um, but I know that I was like, you and I had a chat a few months ago, right, at the Imsterfest where we met, right, about the some of the portable stuff that you use, like you use like the Universal Apollos, but you have them kind of modded or something to be able to. What was that again now?
Yeah, so I own 3 different, Universal Audio Apollo interfaces, an Apollo 16 that's in Chicago, an Apollo 8 quad, I think is, the main one I have in London, and then I have a portable, Apollo Twin, quad, I think. And but all of them I've had modded by Blackline Audio, which is a Chicago company, but they're internationally known, specifically for taking audio interfaces from various third-party companies and modding them out. So, taking all the cheap transistors and resistors and, transformers, power supplies, ADD card I mean, whatever they can get away with swapping out. It's not everything that gets swapped out. I mean, it's very strategic and what they feel makes sense, and they mix and match to figure out what makes the best, the biggest bang for your buck sonic improvements. But a good friend of mine actually worked over there for a long time, so, he's kind of worked out all the kinks, that he's found over the years, and so he modded all 3 of mine, and they make a night and day difference.
Wow, that's so is there something different then about, the way that you can get the best out of your headphones from plugging in your headphones into one of those devices?
Well, the headphone amp specifically, I know the op amp has changed out. I don't know what else, is changed out, but I know, like, it is you can immediately hear a difference. It wasn't like I needed to A/B it compared to a different Apollo. It was like, I haven't heard this interface in a week since I sent it off to get modded, but it's back, and I know that it just sounds my room sounds different now. These headphones
Yeah.
sound different now in a good way. So yeah, it's a definitive quality upgrade. As far as technically what goes on behind the scenes, that's far from a
Wow.
specialty of mine, but whatever they're doing something right.
Well, yeah, I'd say so. I mean, but it is perhaps a part of the process that some independent music creators might overlook because we can plug headphones into a computer, into the headphone jack, and then work on a project, open it up quickly, do some edits, record something, and actually, we forget that the internal sound card in most laptops is not particularly that good. I mean, it sort of does the job, it's audible, but when you get to that kind of net, for those that kind of go, how do I get my mixes to the next level or whatever? And very often it's about how we're hearing what's there, isn't it? So a headphone amp or a sort of digital to analog converter of some kind makes the world of difference, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Yeah. I mean, digital technology in general, as you know, has come a very, very, very long way. So, the old, laptops from, 10, 15 years ago really didn't sound very good. Now they sound, decent. But there's still that next level. Absolutely. And even what I use isn't, uh, top tier. I think even though there is value to that, I think there's kind of a limit to how much makes sense, knowing that the bulk of our consumers at the end, they're going to be playing back from an iPhone or an Android or from a laptop or obviously their cars, whatever it may be. I mean, we kind of have to factor that into the equation. So it's nice to be able to hear as high fidelity as possible while we're mixing. But there's just like everything in the industry, I think there's a trade off and a limit when you figure out your bang for the buck scenario. Tech wise, what do I need versus how will it be played at the end? It's the same reason why
Yeah.
you'll go to a lot of studios and they'll have, multiple different sets of speakers to be able to monitor on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's easily overlooked that sometimes, I think. Let's talk about like accessibility, right? Because I mean, you've got some huge credits to your name, right? You know, the likes of Kanye West, Adam Levine, Rihanna, the Clark sisters, of course, John Legend. But are your skills and services kind of available and accessible to anyone?
Yeah, yeah. I do predominantly independent artists these days, actually. Yeah, I have independent rates, I have major label rates, just like most engineers do.
Yeah,
And things come in waves as far as major label work. But indie artists are, I would, yeah, predominantly what I work with. There's a lot of upside to that. You get generally a bit more creative control when you don't have many different bosses to sign off on things with major labels. You have A&Rs and managers and label execs. So it's a less stressful process to work with indies. It's a more creative process generally to work with indies. Um, and even though, the rates are lower, and when you boil down the amount of time spent, all of a sudden it becomes a toss up on financially, business wise, which one makes more sense. So, there's absolutely pros and cons to both sides of it. But I enjoy working with both, and yeah, I'm very accessible. Anybody hits me up, I reply to the email. I hear the rough mix. We get on the same page and we see if we can make something work together.
good for you. Good for you. I mean, it's important, isn't it? Because, there's so many people out there that kind of go, right, I've got the right song, or we've got the right voice, we've got the right group, whatever. But then the mix, that final stage, it's just not quite there, and it might stop a band or a DJ or a singer-songwriter from being able to kind of go, "Why can I not get these playlists? Why can't I get this do it?" Well, and sometimes it's that stage, isn't it? So it's great that you are available to people,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, you can have I mean, the song is first and foremost what is the biggest part of any track, of course, right? I mean, it starts with the songwriting, and then after that, it's the performance and the production, then eventually the recording, then eventually the mix, and eventually the master. It's a team sport, though. So you don't want to, check all those boxes and have an amazing song, and then mix it internally and have it not reach its full potential, or have it mixed externally and have it sound great, but then skimp on the mastering process. It's a team sport. I mean, the better the song is, generally speaking, the better it's written, the easier it's going to be to perform, the easier it's going to come across in the production stage, easier it is to record, easier it is to mix, et cetera, et cetera. So it's absolutely a team sport, and I'm sure it's not unique just to our industry, but that's a problem sometimes. People skimp on certain aspects, and it doesn't allow something to reach its full potential.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good point. Good point. And do you excuse me, um do you use predominantly software for mastering as well? Because so many are now, right?
Yeah, no, I'm completely in the box when I mix and master. When I record, I love analog gear. It's just financially doesn't make a whole lot of sense, especially from a mixing
Mm.
mastering point of view. To be in a big analog mix studio, to utilize 50 to 100, patch cables for all that additional outboard gear, it's just too time consuming when your normal artists are so used to working in their own DAWs and their own computers and double clicking a file, and boom, that's your full recall, ready to go within a minute.
Yeah.
That's not the case with analog gear. And so generally I feel like I can get the sound quicker with analog gear, but then it takes exponentially longer on the backside for recalls. So it doesn't make sense. Plus the additional cost for electricity, the additional cost for upkeep. Obviously the lack of portability is a big part of it as well. So yeah, I've been completely in the box for mixing and mastering for probably probably 8 or 9 years, probably maybe 10 years.
Really?
Um,
Wow.
and yeah, I mean, the first mastering engineer that I worked with that was completely digital was Glenn Meadows in Nashville, and his stuff sounded phenomenal. He was doing like Steely Dan and Taylor Swift, completely digital.
Oh, wow.
This was, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago. When I was picking his brain about these things, and at the time it really blew my mind that he was 100% digital for those things, and he was very open with his methods and techniques, and I learned a lot from him. But and that was kind of the basis for how I started mastering, and I didn't even think twice about the fact that I wasn't using analog gear.
That's interesting. I mean, that's yeah. And I spoke to I can't remember his bloody name now, but Ollie somebody from Abbey Road. He's a master
Ollie
engineer.
Morgan. Yeah, I
Yes.
know Ollie. Yeah, he's a good guy.
Ah, oh, great. I thought you would. Yeah. Yeah, lovely, lovely guy. And he was telling me that, he just uses just software, pure digital, and how, and he said something which was really, really good. He said, look, when I'm mastering, I'm using the same tools as what a mix engineer would. I'm just using them a bit differently,
Yeah,
what a great way of explaining it.
really is. Yeah, it's it's better than I could have put it.
Oh, no. Now let's just time jump back a little bit, James. Right? Um, you know, you've honed your skills in studios, like you alluded to earlier when you kind of first started out and stuff. How did you start off in music? Did you always want to be, a producer, an engineer, or did the goal evolve from like a different musical starting point?
Yeah, I mean, I started playing trumpet in 3rd grade, like, way back in the day. My parents made
Ah,
and I mean, I was awful at it. I was no good at it. I think I liked the idea of it kind of, but I definitely didn't wanna put the work that was, mandatory to become good at it, and but, I'm really happy my parents made me play it. Because of that, I ended up going to an arts high school. Because of that, I did learn how to read music. Understand melody versus harmony. Because of that, I started to play guitar. That's something I actually did really want to do. So I started doing that in high school. I started learning chord structure and songwriting, and I started to sing a little bit. Another thing I wasn't especially very good at, nor was I especially
ah,
very good at guitar. But because of that, that was in like the year 2000 or 2001 or something. So a while back now, and we went to record our band's first CD, and that was around about the time where I needed to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And I said, "Whoa, this guy gets to record music all day. That's pretty cool." So not something I had thought about, and I picked his brain, and yeah, eventually that's what I decided I wanted to do. Is I was not going to be a rock star, but I could still contribute and be creative, live in the music industry, and I was always computer savvy. And nowadays all kids are computer savvy, but at that point, not too many were. So I was able to understand, the basics of digital audio workstations at that point. I got an internship while still in Ohio. Ended up going to an audio college in Florida called Full Sail. And after that, I ended up going to Chicago, and like I mentioned, doing that traditional route of working tons of hours for no money as an intern, and then moving up to general assistant and staff engineer, head staff engineer. Eventually left, went freelance, eventually opened up my own studio, eventually moved to London. Yeah, so that's the nutshell
wow.
of the whole thing. But yeah,
That's
started with playing trumpet.
got that trumpet's got a lot to answer for, James.
I know, right?
That's wow. I love that. I love that that was your starting point, because if you were to remove that trumpet, if you like, then you know
Thanks.
you might have taken a different path, maybe.
Yeah, you're right. I
Well, I'm
wouldn't
I'm
have done
I'm
it
glad that trumpet found its way into your life, mate.
too. No, I didn't especially appreciate it at the time, but in hindsight, like I said, I'm very happy that my parents made me stick with it because I if I would have had my own choice, I would have not stuck with it for very long.
God, I love that. Do you? What about on the business side of things? Do you? I wouldn't because I know this varies between people sometimes about like kind of points and stuff. And do you kind of just prefer to operate on a kind of fee-based service, or do you kind of, do you ask for sort of intellectual property rights on songs or on recordings, or does it vary quite a lot? Because I asked that question to quite a lot of different people, and there's a lot of variables to it.
Yeah, it varies, but in general, most mix engineers and especially mastering engineers generally don't get points on records. You'd have to be the top of the top echelon to demand points and to receive points. So it's a rare thing for me, and it's more so it's unfortunately not common for major labels and myself and my history, but with independence as a way to kind of pad a lower upfront rate. So instead of it being a pure work for hire situation, where you don't get anything on the back end. You figure out, okay, well, this project maybe has some potential. I could see this thing having some legs. Does it make sense? And unfortunately, it doesn't make sense a lot of times. Um, and it's also because I have no control over it, and that's not a specialty of mine as far as how does it get marketed. How well is it going to do once it's in the marketplace. Um, it's completely out of my control, and it's hard also to factor in from a business standpoint to predict how all that stuff is going to work itself out. So, some people, obviously dive more into that side of things, and it works out well for them. But for me, I tend to just do the straight fee work for hire more often than not.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's been a couple of media composers that I've interviewed on the podcast, and they will talk about the importance of how they very often copy mix engineers in on the song split on the publishing side rather than on the recording side, so that they benefit from it more because they say, look, the sonics are so important to this song that's on this production music album that's primarily written for television use, for background use. And so they'll say, we it's not that we don't want to pay the mix engineer, we're really happy to, but we also pay a fee, but also give him or her 10% of the song as well. I mean, I suppose that kind of thing sits more in that particular context, but it makes sense to me to do things like that because, you know, if somebody takes their song and they go, right, here's this song, and here's where we want to go with it. But here's how it could sound if we get James involved. It's like those are two going to be two different things, right? So that remuneration for that, doesn't always have to be necessarily fee based. But then it's like, how much of the heavy lifting do you have to do after that? Are you involved with like having to push the song or something? Because that's a different thing as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, I think I agree with everything you said there. In general, the business side of things does not come natural to me. I'm very much, let me sit in front of a computer and tinker with something, and eventually it's going to sound good, and that's what my natural abilities are. But as you know, there's so much more to the music industry than that, and so everything else has been me going outside of my comfort zone. I mean, just even networking, right? I'm very very introverted naturally, but forcing myself to network because, as everyone will tell you, that's so important. Eventually, I realized that it was important, and I forced myself to do that. Same thing with anything business related. Even, for example, looking at my Chicago studio as an expansion and keeping it open while I went away, and kind of changing the business model on it, are not things that were my initial instinct whatsoever. So it's the same kind of thing with getting points on any kind of song is I think it makes a whole lot of sense. And for whatever reason, I think a lot of those times it doesn't find me, but I don't fight for it either. And I think there's, as I mentioned before, I think there's pros and cons to both sides of it. If it's a conversation an artist or a client wants to have, I'm always open to it. It's just not something that always comes up, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Um, Good for you. No, that's great, man. So, James, finally, what advice would you give to emerging creators, particularly um, producers? In fact, let's go a little wider. Producers, songwriters, and artists, right? What advice would you give them if they're just kind of starting out their careers? Maybe like that sort of 5 years in or something like that. What advice would you give to them?
Uh, one big thing is finding a good team to work with, right? Like if we say that it's a team sport, right? I mean, find what you're really good at, what you're really passionate about, but be okay with not micromanaging every aspect. Like it's hard to find someone who can write and perform and produce and record and to do all the different things themselves to a very high standard. It's very very rare. It's not impossible, but because there are a few examples of those types, some people will think that can be everybody, and that's going to be detrimental to a lot of people. A lot of people don't have any kind of technical ability. They don't have any kind of critical listening skills for high end, approval purpose type listening, i.e., mixing or mastering. And to find a team that can work within your budget, that can get on the same page as you, that can work towards the same goal. I think that's something that is overlooked again, because now you can have Logic or Ableton or Studio One, let alone Pro Tools, or and you can do so much of the stuff yourself. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Uh,
Mm.
so I think that's the biggest thing that I would maybe tell someone who's, as you said, a few years in, already has a lot of their bearings in the industry, but don't try to do everything yourself.
Yeah, that's really, really sound advice. One of the things that I've noticed among many emerging music creators is the inability to finish projects.
Yeah.
And I do mention it quite a lot to people because it kind of worries me a bit because it's not something that people ever used to do, really. I think it's something that's more problematic in the modern era. I think I know why it is as well, actually. I think it's sometimes that people overwhelm themselves, right, by trying to do too much.
Mhm.
Then they lose a bit of motivation, bit of direction. And actually, the reason I mention this now is because I think that the thing that drives that is what you just talked about there. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's a big one.
I mean, I mean, it's a little bit like, I don't know, like I've been playing guitar for like, I dread to even think how long. I think it's about 30 years. Jesus. Anyway, and so, but I don't. I used a lot of samples, right, as a producer, and it's not. It's just about time, right? And there's so many amazing tools out there now. It's like, yeah, I could plug in and tune up and do that amp and set this up, mic this, and it'll be a lot of fun. But I could lose a couple of hours there, or I could get a contact instrument and nail it in 10 minutes.
Mhm. Exactly.
It's efficiency, time management stuff again, isn't it? But also, you know, you can't do everything, right? No one can.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that statement.
Or we can't. We think we can, don't we? But but it is what it is. James, thank you so much for being here, for talking, for sharing yourself, and just being here on the Music Business Buddy. You're a top man. Happy New Year.
Hey, thanks, Johnny. Appreciate it.
Ah, good man. I really enjoyed talking to James. He's such a nice fella. I hope that you got a lot out of listening to him. One of the many things that we hear about in this industry is that, you can't do everything on your own, which, we hear a lot of people say, and it is about collaboration and it is about teamwork. But the trouble is, it can feel quite lonely and quite isolating if we're not careful. So sometimes it really helps us to understand all of the roles that people play in this business because it helps us to be able to figure out who we then need to work with, And just, for example, just taking someone like James, having his hands on your project right at the end of its creative process will make an extraordinary difference. So anyway, I hope that's been useful. Wherever you are, have a great day. Feel free to rate the podcast, send me messages, anything you like. Feedback is always welcome and encouraged. Okay, right, I will leave you to it now. Have a great day and may the force be with you.
The music